here Rui da Cunha from the University of Porto. Rui has a degree in law and in philosophy, and is now a PhD student under the supervision of the MLAG, which is Mind Language Action Group at the University of Porto. And he's going to talk to us about, I have it here, AI and the future of human values, feedback loops, techno-moral change, and transformative experiences. Thank you, Rui, for accepting this invitation. And okay, thank you. It's for me to thank you for the invitation, for being here. Let me just start by saying that this is a work in progress. So I'm trying to connect different strands of thought, and I'm trying to see if we can configure the so-called AI control problem or AI alignment problem as what is a transformative experience. Essentially, that will be the focus. The transformative experience is a term by L.A. Paul, which she did not use for technology specifically. She uses, we'll see what she uses it for. In any case, this application to technology and to the AI problem is my attempt. So that's the idea. I want to start off with a quote here. Move this to the other side for you to read. Probably over here. So a familiar quote, I believe, from people working in technology, from Norbert Wiener, the father of cybernetics, that encapsulates our problem. Aldous Huxley put it another way in 1937, that it has become apparent that what triumphant science has done hitherto is to improve the means for achieving unimproved or actually deteriorated ends. So this idea that we need to think as our technology progresses, and particularly with this last decade progress in AI, that we need to think carefully about the values and our goals and how we achieve them. This other quote is from L.A. Paul, which is I can move this? No. So, which is that imagine that you have the possibility to become a vampire, and with one swift, painless bite, you'll be permanently transformed into an elegant and fabulous creature of the night. As a member of the undead, your life will be completely different. You'll experience a range of intense revelatory nuisance experiences. You'll gain immortal strength, speed, and power, and you'll look fantastic in everything you wear. You'll also need to drink blood and avoid sunlight. Now, I like this idea, and it's important to me for two things. It takes this idea of a transformation to the extreme. So it's helpful in clarifying our thought. It's a thought experiment, and I have a thing for thought experiments. I think they're helpful. They're not the alpha and omega of philosophical methodology, but they are interesting. We shouldn't throw them away just because of some misleading intuitions. And it also shows that culturally we have always had different thoughts about becoming we have always had thoughts about becoming something different than human, right? And so our culture and the way we see the world shapes what it is at that moment for us different. In a certain moment, it can be becoming a machine. In a certain moment, it can be becoming a Frankenstein or a vampire. In another moment, it can be becoming a golem or a chimera. So there is this cultural ladenness to the way we think about what might be different from humans. In any case, this will serve us because it's the most extreme example of those so-called transformative experiences. Okay, and keep this in mind when we return to it. But before that, the so-called AI alignment problem. So how do I move this so that you guys can see? Yeah. Okay. Maybe this is enough. So we can define this as the problem of control, of retaining absolute power over machines that are more powerful than us. We know that probably we should start with trying to define what is a value, but I'll skip that. I'll approach it in another slide. But I think that we can take for the moment and for this purpose as somehow equivalent to, although it's surely a problem, but equivalent to preferences, desires, intentions, whatever, purposes, goals, and ends. So the idea is that we want to make sure that technology is aligned or fit with human values. I propose this minimalist definition that AI systems act in ways that are beneficial to humans or that cohere with human values, because it somehow captures the both aspects of the problem. And if we are to discuss some of these problems relating AI, we are not only focusing on the most extreme cases of a general artificial intelligence. Okay, the problem arises also in more mundane situations like a recommender system for Spotify or Netflix or whatever that recommends something and that works based on an algorithm that we are not very sure how it works and so on. Now, about these technical approaches, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, it's the idea that we can have this supervised learning where a system is given a series of examples with labels and is told to make predictions about new examples it hasn't seen. In unsupervised learning, is just presented, the system is presented with the data and the correlations, the patterns that it extracts from it. And the reinforcement learning, which is one of the most interesting ones, where you have a system placed into a setting, an environment with rewards and punishments, and he's told to figure out the best way to minimize the punishment and maximize the rewards. Okay? So from this, there's a very enticing way of seeing, which is to think of this in a simplistic framework, and to think of this, that this can be solved just, doing a processual analysis with, three challenges: to define and choose our values, to translate them into code, and then to monitor implementation. Jason Gabriel from DeepMind has a paper on this, and he talks about just the technical challenge and the normative challenge, which I think we can, if we wanted to, we could try to say that, well, the first one is a normative challenge, and the second and third one are technical challenges, although they, in many cases, somehow mix. So, for instance, if we need to define and choose our values, how are we to do that? Are we going with a minimalist or a maximalist conception of value alignment? We want the system to absolutely to be a perfect fit with whatever our values are, or as I said before, do we want it to just minimize the unintended harm to those values? And then ask whether
dei neuroni di categorizazione.
There's someone talking.
Praticamente la modifica in realtà contemporaneamente stava lavorando bits questa cosa.
Okay. And so one question which could be an entire different talk is whether this really is a new problem or just a new and applied version of an old problem. I tend to have a deflationary idea here in the sense that this isn't all that different from the challenge in Rawls' theory of justice of trying to figure out the principles that should guide us in building an ideal society. In the sense, whether we're talking about the principles or the values, we're still talking about this challenge of having different sets of preferences, of how we value things. And so it's not specific in the sense to human AI, to artificial intelligence, sorry. So the second and third challenge would be, even if we could somehow surpass the first challenge, and now we know which values we want to deal with, how do we translate it into code? Which is the best method? So again, going with Gabriel, which is from DeepMind Google, he makes it a very interesting and I think not sufficiently noticed observation that there is this affinity between certain ethical theories like utilitarianism and some technical methods like reinforcement learning, in the sense that they are both working in the space of maximization. They are both thinking that whatever it is that is valued, the approach should be maximization. This is interesting in the sense that if you are already working with a certain framework in the way you see the world and in the way you see the ethical actions like utilitarianism, then you are obviously going to see the affinity with the reinforcement learning method. So your framework is already forcing you to this position. And then the third challenge, to monitor implementation. This is where the most discussed or talked about examples usually come from when people discuss the alignment problem, which is the idea of malfunctioning. So I think Bostrom mentions this example in his super intelligence book of the Soviet public worker that saw the nuclear warning system. It malfunctioned and it represented, a nuclear attack by the US, and the human had well, I wouldn't call it intuition, but he had the rationality to stop and analyze the situation, the probability of a real attack, and not go with what the technology was telling him to do, which was to launch a counterattack. There are also, of course, besides malfunctioning, unintended consequences. Bostrom again talks about the paperclip example. If you order the artificial intelligence to build paperclips, will it get rid of us because we're, in a way, we're occupying space for storage, for instance, because it wants to maximize the production, which is kind of similar to what Russell names the King Midas problem. Of course, you can try to tackle this with AI explainability, which is something more recent, the idea of trying to make some sense of all these algorithms. I am a bit skeptical on that, maybe, and I have to assume this, maybe because I haven't, or not maybe, probably, very probably because I haven't read enough, but I have some difficulty in understanding or wrapping my head around the idea that you can control something that you don't know how it works, that you don't know how, you can't understand its functioning. So it seems difficult, but there might be technical solutions to this, of course. So for me, and these are the intuitions with which I start from, I believe that the true intractability or the true difficulty of the alignment problem is this, that we have, on the one hand, technology changing our concepts and our values, our concepts and our values changing technology in turn, and the bigger problem, which I'll use Paul's transformative experiences for, is the idea that some changes can't be anticipated and or calculated, at least not in its full extension. Okay, so it will be difficult to deal with. And so my guiding insights here, or my helpers, are these three authors, Danaher and Skexetra on techno-moral change, Hacking on the idea of a feedback loop, and Paul on transformative experiences. Okay, let's move to the first one. And this gives some substance to the idea that technology might be changing our concepts and our values. Okay. So Danaher talks about technology. He's highly influenced by these authors, Don Hyde and Paul Verbeek, the idea that technology is a mediator in a pragmatic sense, and also in an hermeneutic sense. And then in this paper, he and Satan kind of unfold this true sense of mediation into a taxonomy of the mechanisms from which we can anticipates the moral change caused by technology. So these mechanisms of techno-moral change can be decisional in the sense that with technology, we can have different sets of options. It becomes possible to make decisions that weren't possible before. Take the contraceptive pill, or take the smartphone, the simple smartphone. And so it changes our possibility of options, whether to call someone or not, in a moral, for instance, situation, whether it creates, for instance, the new moral issue, in the sense that if I were here presenting this talk like 30 years ago, it wouldn't be an issue whether to return a call from someone distressed at home or having some problem, or returning a text message from someone in a personal relationship, or some kind of moral problem that arose from there, because you wouldn't even have the phone with you, so you wouldn't even know that someone was trying to reach you, so you wouldn't even have to get into the dilemma of replying or not. And so in the sense that technology expands what we can do in the world, it's going to create these decision problems, and these decision problems can change our our morality in a descriptive sense. Danaher is here not saying that it changes what we should do specifically. It's more kind of like a descriptive view of morality, just sociological in this sense. It's also relational in the sense that we, with these technologies, these new technologies, we can enable these new relationships. So we can have connections with distant others in mediated forms. We can have new potential relationship partners. People are, having or saying that they're having romantic relationships with chatbots, or in meaningful relationships, at least with large language models or chatbots. It can have this very significant moral effect in the sense that it can expand the moral circle, right? So we might have to make the decisions, or at least have the discussion, whether who will be worthy of our moral consideration. Will it be just any kind of AI that have some sort of embodiment, AI that have some embodiment with some sort of sensors that have some kind of feedback similar to a paint system or something? So we'll have to have that discussion. And also perceptual, which is not the the most apt description of what he means here, or what they mean here, because it's also conceptual. It's the idea that you have new information, new data, new mental models, and so you are going to you are going to see the world and the elements in it in a different way, and you are going to perceive the value of certain activities also in a different way. You're going to value things differently. So, for instance, if we have, I think it's Sven Nihol, I think that's how it's pronounced, Sven Nihol, that talks about robotomorphism, which is a very similar idea to this one, which is kind of taking this to the extreme. The idea that if we are so influenced by AI and by AI way of thinking and acting, that we somehow change our own ways of being into becoming more robot-like or more artificial-like. And so our mental models of the world, also the metaphor that we use to speak about ourselves and our relationship to the world might change in respect and because of it. Now, so I think this helps me establish that technology is very high potential to change our values. Of course, I want to go to reenacting these ideas of the feedback loop, because it takes this, gives it a spin and shows that there is this recursive effect. I can distinguish between, well, he's usually presented as distinguishing between natural kinds and social kinds, and the saying, natural kinds are static and social kinds are interactive or dynamic. But it's not that clear-cut a distinction, because the distinction is primarily about the staticness and the interactiveness, the responsiveness to our conceptualizations about them. It's just the case that, well, of course, the more nature is a bit more static and less changeable than our concepts. And so suppose that, people, and Hacking uses this example of the people with multiple personality disorder. You suppose that, people used to classify as F as having multiple personality disorder, now know themselves to be classified as this. And as a result of this knowledge, they're going to engage in behavior, call it B, whatever. And this behavior, manifesting this new behavior, then becomes a criterion for being labeled as F in the first place. So there is this loop that the category changes the people, who in turn will change the category. And so this, what would happen, I think that already happens, this idea of the interactive kinds and the feedback loops is already very much a good explanation of that so-called robotomorphism that I was talking about, and that perceptual or conceptual change, or techno-moral change that Danaher was talking about. Because in a sense, what happens is that we need to find the categories, but then we're going to be defined by them and change because of them. So if AI systems start now categorizing and responding to human behaviors, they're going to be inadvertently contributing to us expressing more or less of those kinds of behaviors. So they'll reshape those behaviors and those values, even if we are not aware of them. Okay. And so if they become part of the loop, until now it was all about the world out there and our practices, those were the only elements that could, change and could be a part of this loop, this feedback loop in the conceptions. If it becomes part of the loop, then it becomes even clearer that our concepts and our values and our technology are in this circle. I would say probably once we started a never-ending relationship. And now, I think, yeah, so I'm tired. And now to the most interesting part, I think, of the talk, which is Paul's transformative experiences. So Paul discusses the idea that we have certain kind of experiences in life, choices that are presented to us that have this dual aspect, where we change in the sense that we gain access to new information, but only after having the experience or during the having of the experience, and we change as a person by having the experience. But beforehand, it's impossible to determine how it will go, how it will happen. And so the cases, the examples are those cases of deciding to have a child, deciding college degree, deciding to go to the militaries or to see the world, and the extreme cases of becoming a vampire or those kinds of thought experiments obviously change who we are epistemically in person. Now, notice that, for instance, sensory experiences also have this epistemic aspect of this unknowability, or at least this difficulty in transmitting the information about them to someone else, but they're not usually transformative experiences. I mean, someone can, of course, be changed by the experience of otherworldly landscape, or can have some sort of epiphany in front of nature. I can imagine that happen, but it doesn't usually happen. So we use metaphors, images, but we have a hard time conveying these special distinctive qualities about the experiences. So the paradigmatic cases are these, where you are deciding you don't have the entire information, and there is absolutely no information that could be ever could be sufficient. It's she said that having a transformative experiences teaches you something new, something that you could not have known before having the experience, while also changing you as a person. So we might have testimony from others, we might have access to empirical data, but there is no, we can try to quantify the utility or the happiness of one option or the other, but it's impossible to have the certainty that would allow us to decide in a rational way, because we would need to already be in the experience to decide. So the empirical data will tell us what the average person feels like in the situation. It can even be a very demographic picture of someone very similar to us, but it doesn't guarantee that it will be as us. And the testimony of others, of course, might help us, but it's not enough. So in those kinds of cases, and to go back to the example of becoming a vampire in this time-situated way of conceiving of non-humans, we would have to think whether we want to become the person we believe will arise after the experience. So if we were to put this in terms of the personal identity discussions that we were talking about earlier, it's kind of deciding whether you can think about two different possible selves in two non-factual worlds, and you try to imagine with which one you would identify the most, which one is the person that you want to be. Not necessarily the one that is closest to you now, because maybe you want to change, maybe you are not a parent, you've never been responsible in your life, but somehow a big factor in the decision is thinking that you want to be that person in that world too, that is a parent and is responsible, and not that other person in world one that continued childless. So the only way, according to Paul, is to use your imagination, to try use your empathy abilities. Fiction is important in the sense it's kind of similar to Maria's assessment that we're talking about, the idea of thinking, trying to put yourself in that possible self shoes, and that's the only way to decide authentically. Doesn't mean that it's not rational, but it's not the typical rationality of rational decision-making theories. So this dual aspect then is that the experience teaches you something new, it gives you new information in virtue of your experience, and it changes you how and who you feel yourself to be. So in that sense, even if you could have all the utility calculations from those two possible counterfactual worlds, these are utilities that only make sense in relationship to those selves in those two worlds, not to you now. It's just information that adds nothing to you. You would still need to imagine yourself as one of them to use that information. That's one of the ways she answered some of the objections. So I think that this is we can use this to think about AI alignment, because in AI's fast-paced evolution, we see also an epistemic problem of epistemic access. You know, the very black box nature of these language learning models and other algorithms means that we really can't anticipate or predict any of the outcomes of the experiences. So it's really hard for us to have these discussions. For instance, that we have in philosophy of AI, how are we going to treat an artificial intelligence that shows signs of consciousness? How are we going to include or not a robot in our moral circle? Because we really don't know exactly how they will work, and we don't know exactly how that situation will be. We don't have all the information about that. And also, personally, there are those impacts that AI might cause on a societal level, changing, again, our morality, our conceptions, providing that feedback loop that might make it impossible, even if we have all the information, to decide whether we want to define these values or those values as the ones for the machine to respect from now on. Sorry. Oh. So, of course, we can project some scenarios from past experiences, but we can predict accurately. Sorry, if it was harder to predict the evolution of technology in cases where we had a clear-cut understanding of the technology's functioning, like the contraceptive pill or the smartphone, it's and the societal changes were huge and in many ways unpredictable, then it stands to reason that it will probably be even more so with technologies that we don't have a very clear idea of how they work. Now, my problem is this, that we can be more or less persuaded with Paul's reasoning about transformative experiences. Again, this application to AI is my view, not hers. A lot of people criticize Paul on the grounds that, yes, there is some subjective aspect to those transformative choices, but it doesn't mean that that subjective aspect is going to completely swamp out or eliminate some objectiveness that we can have. Some sort of objective quantification that we can make in terms of the decision possibility spectrum. Again, her idea is that even if we can quantify something about the decisions, for instance, the simple decision of being a parent or not, or becoming a parent or not becoming a parent, even if we can quantify the pleasure and the displeasure that it would bring us, utilities, cost and benefits for someone like us, it still doesn't help because there is this aspect of the changing self. And so the self will always be a different one in calculating or in appreciating that those utility values. So one wonders whether the objections to the individual case might apply to this societal extension, or perhaps not so much, given that at least the empirical data, which on an aggregate for an individual considering the decision might not make sense to use the aggregated data, because at least in most cases, you won't identify specifically with the average or the median. It might make sense for society as a whole to use that data, particularly because there is in this case of this subjectiveness of trying to imagine itself as a different kind of society. So maybe the objections to the individual case are less strong if we are thinking in aggregate terms. Maybe on the other hand, it also isn't that important because at least individual, we have some degree of autonomy as to the kind of self we want to be, which in terms of society, we probably, even though we might think we have some degree of control where we are going in terms of our shared values and all of that, but it's still a discussion that's somehow very much escapes any kind of control, at least in a democratic state. So this very idea of trying to align the values and trying to make sure that these are the values that are going to be kept for the machine to obey and verify is also problematic in the sense that we might be doing some sort of intergenerational injustice, because we might be limiting the set of options in terms of values for our sons and grandsons. Again, when we mentioned earlier that this might not be exactly new because we've used Rawls' idea of the original position to think about You know, it's not a coincidence, right? That from Rawls, a lot of Rawls thinking and Bartlett's and various ideas of justice came this whole entire field of intergenerational justice. So the similarity explains itself, I guess. We can ask, and that's the second point of my tentative conclusions, whether there are available solutions that we could implement, these advanced directives or Ulysses contract, or you find yourself to that. But again, that's the problem. Are we not limiting the degree of possibilities for our future society self, so to speak? And my last interrogation, my last concern is this: is the argument causing incidental methodological damage? This is a very constructed kind of term that I came up with, admittedly using ChatGPT. I asked them, can you give me a good term in English for an argument that misses the mark in the sense of not making its exact point in terms of substance, but somehow might have an impact on another issue, which is epistemic or methodological, more specifically. And he came up with a bunch of them. Not exactly this one. It was incidental enlightenment, involuntary illumination, but actually from the just choosing one element of one of the suggestions and one of the others, this is the one that I came up with. And I think it also highlights this idea that we are starting to find this kind of use relatively normal. Our practices are changing also this way. And what is this methodological damage that I mentioned? Is if we are correct about this, if Paul is correct about this, that there is no information that we can access to do and that we won't know until we change, doesn't this make the very idea of thought experiments practically useless? Because one of the notions or one of the reasons for us to use thought experiments is for us to try to pick on some of the information that we know, keep some conditions constant, like a physical experiment, and then vary one of the elements. Like this is the variable that changes, you know, everything else remains constant. So that supposes that we have enough knowledge of that situation of the thought experiment to do that change on keeping some variables constant and others that change, right? And if we have this problem of epistemic access in so mundane situations as deciding to be a parent or going to the military, doesn't it also mean that we'll probably have even more problems with thought experiments and becoming a vampire or becoming a cyborg and all of that? So that's my problem, and I'll conclude with this because it bothers me if this is the case, because I like thought experiments a lot. I was trying to see how far I could go with Paul's ideas and applying it to the AI situation. But as I've said before, I have a lot of reservations on all of this. So hopefully with your contributions, I can clarify some of my own doubts and questions. So thank you very much. Okay.